Dominik Brejta is a sector specialist at the Standards Council of Canada. In his role, he advises industry, academia, and government partners on navigating a standardization system and develop strategies to advance business and policy objectives. So today he's going to give an overview of how standards works, and then introduce some blockchain standards effort, outline a roadmap for Canadian blockchain standard work. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And just to confirm, can you see my my PowerPoint up?
Yes, we can, and we can hear you well. So yes.
Fantastic. So firstly,
please go ahead.
Thank you very much. So first, I just want to thank the organizers of the conference for the opportunity to present, and to everyone for your participation at the conference today. So my name is Dominik Brejta. I work as a sector specialist at the Standards Council of Canada. And so first, I will provide an overview of who the Standards Council of Canada is and what we do. So I'm going to give an overview of some standards work in the blockchain space, and I will also speak about the blockchain standards workshop that the SCC hosted back in January. I will also highlight some key recommendations for future work. And I do want to clarify, I'm not a computer scientist or an engineer or a coder. At SCC, we're not necessarily like blockchain experts, but rather we're standards experts. And I want to throw that caveat out. And also right off the bat, I will mention, we do not write standards ourselves. So you're probably wondering, what do we do? Well, we are Canada's national standards body and national accreditation body. So we oversee the standardization system in Canada. Now, what does this mean? Well, we have several roles that we play. So internationally, we give Canadians a path to participate in international standards development and conformity assessment work. So we're Canada's voice at international standards bodies like the International Organization for Standardization, ISO, the International Electrotechnical Commission, IEC, and we also coordinate Canadian participation in that international standards work. We help promote international priorities as well, making sure Canada has a voice at that table. Now, domestically, we accredit standards development organizations in Canada. So CSA Group, UL, CIO Strategy Council, others. So when they publish a standard, they get our stamp of approval that they can call it a national standard of Canada. And we also have an advisory role. So we advise and support government, academia, and businesses with helping them navigate the standards development process. So what we don't do, well, like I said, we don't write standards. And also I will caveat that we don't necessarily have control over all standards work. Standards work by an organization that we accredit. Like I said, it can be called a National Standard of Canada. Essentially, that means it follows a process that was robust, transparent, and based on the consensus of a balanced group of stakeholders. So there is other standards work that takes place in Canada. There are other companies and organizations and groups that will write documents and call them standards, and that's fine. They can do that. They just can't call it a national standard of Canada because there's no guarantee of what process they used to develop it, or if it was developed by consensus with balanced representation, if it was done transparently. So there are various definitions for a standard, and I apologize for having to read this, but I do want to just level set by sharing the definition that we use for a standard. So a standard is a document that provides a set of agreed upon rules, guidelines, or characteristics for activities or their results. They establish accepted practices, technical requirements, and terminologies for a diverse field. So essentially, they set a common language and best practices for concepts or new technologies. Standards are voluntary for the most part. So we don't force anyone to follow a particular standard. We usually just leave it up to the market. The exception is when sometimes standards can be mandatory when they're referenced in regulation. And also, I will mention that standards also reflect the views of the individuals who develop them. And so as a result, participating in standards, you can help shape your industry. So either securing market access, creating new markets, improving productivity, or influencing marketplace rules. And I mean, there are standards for lots of different domains, or products or processes or subject areas. I mean, there's a standard for building ships or for testing paints. There's a standard for currency codes that says that CAD stands for the Canadian dollar, or that USD is the US dollar. I mean, there's even a standard for a cup of tea. If you want to look it up, it's ISO 3103. Just thought I mentioned that. And so while we facilitate participation in standards in many areas, in particular, our interest is in emerging technologies. So where there's a lack of standards, oftentimes. And so often there's also a lack of knowledge of how to be active or participate in standards. And so that's where we try to help. So the areas that we focus on, aside from blockchain, we also focus on AI and IoT and cybersecurity, robotics and clean tech, and many other domains. And our goal is to support Canadian innovators. We're hopeful that we can help, like in the standardization space, help bring Canada to the forefront of new and emerging technologies. Now, for blockchain and DLT specifically, there are already some standards work that has been done and some that's currently ongoing. In general, most of the work has been at a horizontal level with foundational standards being created. There have been some, but fewer sector vertical standards. And most of the work has also been done at the international level, although many Canadians are actually active in these activities, including some of the people that we have here today. So I'm going to provide a quick overview of some of the standards activities in blockchain. Now, this is not a complete list, but again, it's a general overview. So here is a list of select technical committees or groups that are at the international standards organizations. So they're not the only standards bodies that are working on blockchain by any means, but they're some of the largest. And there are also lots of industry organizations or industry groups that do work around blockchain, although they don't necessarily all publish standards. Now, in terms of what has been published, there are hundreds of standards on the topic or that at least mention blockchain in some form. Not every standard is equal and not every standard is equally used. So on the screen, I put up 5 of the 8 standards that ISO Technical Committee 307 has published. And you can get the full list. If you just go to Google and type in ISO TC 307, you could find the full list. I will also mention that many standards are protected IP and are behind a paywall. And so while I acknowledge that can be difficult for some, we don't necessarily recommend going out and buying a large volume of standards. I mean, that adds up. That can lead to high costs. But if you are interested in a particular standards body or particular standard, you could also consider joining the working group, and the organization might potentially be able to provide you access to the relevant standards at that time. Very quickly, I will also just highlight that TC 307 also has 10 standards under development. I put on the screen a couple of them. And so if you are interested in contributing to the standards that are currently ongoing, you could join the group of Canadian experts that represents Canada to TC 307. Now, there are other standards bodies as well that have standards work. So IEEE, for example, has published 10 standards with another 50 under development. So I put a few examples on the screen. Now, I'm not saying these are the most used standards. These are just a select few that I wanted to highlight. And if you want to know where to find more information or where to find these, happy to take any questions. So please don't hesitate to reach out. I mean, either after or even after this conference, I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have. One project in Canada that I wanted to highlight, so it's the creation of a technical specification for agriculture blockchain, so specifically for traceability of canola through the Canadian supply chain. So a few years ago, stakeholders in the ag tech space came to us at SCC with the need for some sort of guidance document for using blockchain in agriculture supply chains. So we worked with the stakeholders to develop a strategy. We had an open bid that was then won by CIO Strategy Council, which is one of the SCC accredited SDOs. And so they formed a group of experts and they developed this document, and it was published in December of 2021. So this is, please note that this is not a full standard, rather it's a technical specification, which is like a light version of a standard. And if you'd like to read it, it's actually available for free on CIO Strategy Council's website. Now, on January 18th and 19th, so SCC, along with help from the National Research Council of Canada Industrial Research Assistance Program, or NRC IRAP for short, hosted a virtual workshop to help support the development of a Canadian roadmap for blockchain standardization. So we brought together over 40 leading experts from industry, government, and academia, and even some of the participants are attending or even presenting here today. And for those that did participate at the workshop, I will mention the final copy of the report will be sent to you later today. We're not going to be doing a formal press release or posting it publicly on our website, but if anyone attending the conference would like a copy, please reach out to me and I'll see if I can share a copy with you as well. So I just wanted to go over the overall findings and recommendations from the workshop. And I do want to stress that these findings are based on what the workshop participants discussed, and are not necessarily the official positions of SCC, NRC IRAP, or the Government of Canada. So the goal of the workshop was not to write a standard, rather is to discuss how Canada can advance blockchain adoption, what's needed from government or from standards work, what role can Canada play internationally, what are the priorities and biggest gaps and needs, and what should be the next steps. And so the participants that attended were divided into subgroups based on area of expertise and focused on the area of supply chains, identity management, and healthcare data. So we picked these categories because through discussions with various stakeholders, we had heard a lot that these areas in particular, there's lots of work advancing. And so for each, the participants identified key priorities for advancing the area and recommendations for moving forward. And I will note that input from participants was quite diverse, even within the priorities that were identified. And one caveat that I will add is one of the challenges, as you're aware, is that many blockchain, I guess, or people that aren't familiar with blockchain, many people just think that blockchain equals Bitcoin. And so we wanted to avoid the topic of cryptocurrency, which is a heavily regulated area. And so we wanted to focus on other areas. So we did exclude cryptocurrencies, securities, assets, etc., from the topic. Now, for the supply chain group, the discussion was around, well, one of the points came up was it's difficult for small companies to participate in large projects. They're just too resource intensive. And so other funding channels are needed to support innovative research. And for one example of that would be government support for proof of concept collaborations. Another point that was mentioned was trustworthy education information is needed from government, academia, or other recognized groups that's easy to understand. I mean, there's lots of good work that's out there, but I guess a good place to find everything all in one place, like a repository, would be a great way to help share that information. And so standards can help advance best practices, and government can also help through regulatory sandboxes. Funding frameworks are needed, so finding and highlighting the right business cases for blockchain, and showing use cases and showing the value of them, and hopefully that can help change perceptions and misunderstandings around blockchain, like the one I mentioned, that people that think that blockchain equals Bitcoin. Now, this can be done, for example, through a blockchain living lab for stakeholders to experiment. And I will add that I'm actually happy to hear about the advancements in Alberta that we just heard from Kalea. It's really promising to hear all that. Another point was that ensuring interoperability through an accelerator would help bring together government, academia, and industry. And we would need support from government through a national position and policy on blockchain. Now, in the identity group, what came up was that everyone should be able to manage their digital ID and control their data and who can access it, and for what purpose, and that blockchain could help enable this. The digital ID system must have a system of data governance, so ownership and access and interoperability, for a shared cryptographic credentialing system. And additionally, the point about government leadership came up. So working with industry and academia, government should be designing digital infrastructure and set standards and be the primary issuer of credentials for which other entities, for example, universities, can add identity attributes and credentials. And then in the healthcare data group, what was discussed was the equality of access that has to be established across provinces, communities, and marginalized groups. And for individuals, patients should have access and control over their health data and should be able to consent to sharing that data and withdraw consent when they choose. And healthcare providers should have access, or at least the ability to have access to data that will help them make the best decisions for patients. And broader ecosystem alignment is needed. So defined roles for government and industry and proper standards for enabling a trusted health data ecosystem. Now, looking at the future, the main recommendations that came out of the workshop include, so participants want to see government leadership in blockchain, so informed policy and a clear roadmap for the sector. And they also recommended that government take steps to support growth and adoption of blockchain in Canada. Participants believe that there needs to be more support for initiatives and pilots that use blockchain technology. As I mentioned earlier, many are unsure if the space is necessarily ready for a big project type of initiative, like some projects that fall under, for example, the innovation superclusters. So instead, participants recommended finding support and a more nimble process for developing proofs of concept and for pilot projects. Participants believe that there's a need for awareness and education, the examples and shared resources, as I mentioned as well earlier. And in order to ensure that Canada is involved in and contributing to and benefiting from blockchain, participants want support for expert Canadians to be involved in developing standards in the blockchain space. So while SEC and NRC IRAP are the primary facilitators, it really is up to industry and academia and other government groups and nonprofits to help implement these recommendations. So we want to find partners that we're willing to work with us and to help put together a comprehensive inventory of Canadian activity in blockchain. So that would include case studies, educational material, projects, etc. So we want to leverage the workshop reports to speak to other parts of government and associations and nonprofits, etc., to help find support for pilot projects. And as well, we can help support Canadian involvement in international standards work. And so we would be able to help facilitate, if anyone wanted to participate at an international blockchain technical committee work, we can help facilitate or make those connections. So thank you for your time and attention, and please don't hesitate to reach out to myself if you have any questions. Like I said, if you want to participate in standards, if you think standards can help solve the problem that you're facing, or regarding standards work in regulations. And that is my contact information, and I will stop sharing at this moment, and I will allow, I'll pass the mic on to the next presenter.